Hello, listeners. Thank you for tuning in again this week. This is far more informal than you're used to, but we are in Las Vegas right now. So I wanted to get some input from piercers because the show is typically mental health, trauma, and all that fun stuff. And I wasn't aware that how much that affected the industry. So when I saw your post, I wanted to hear more. So, ladies and gentlemen, Lynn.
This is, yeah, an industry that is full of a lot of mental health issues and a lot of trauma. And, I've just been saying for years that healthy, well adjusted, mentally well people don't usually become body piercers.
When I saw your post and like started to try to wrap my brain around the aspects of mental health that this how it migrates its way in. Um, from what I've seen in previous industries is authoritative figures kind of making you feel small. And when you're an artist and you're trying to expand and like, be open to things, it's tough when you have this like you initially get into the shop and you're like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm part of the cool kids club now. And then, like I said, that authoritative figure kind of makes you go like, fuck, I don't want to be stressed out and this place is supposed to be amazing.
Piercing has uniquely become perfectly set up to create these mental health issues and problems because at its core, piercing was originally not an industry. It was a counterculture. It was a movement of people looking to do interesting things with their bodies, looking to adorn their bodies. Piercing was born out of kink and leather spaces, and
Mhm.
especially queer spaces and marginalized spaces in America in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And of course, if we go further back than that, it's from a lot of black and brown spaces. And what started when we look at American piercing history as an underground community of people who were just passionate and exploring their body in ways, and it very quickly became commercialized and it became an industry. And that innate desire, especially within marginalized communities, to utilize piercings to process trauma, to connect to their bodies, to affirm different things about their life hasn't gone away. So now we have generation after generation of really amazing, beautiful, motivated, passionate people who are using oftentimes piercings as this way of connecting with their bodies and the world around them, entering an industry now with authority figures where it's about money and making a profit, and it's also about control.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like the interactions that I have with clients, like the second that they get in there, if you give them an opening to start talking about their lives, like they just take it and run with it. So yeah, a lot of it is an escape for most clients that come in. Obviously, there's moms bringing in kids and stuff like that. And even then, this is a first big step. So they are putting a lot of trust in you. And it's real easy to make those people feel small too, which then creates that weird dynamic of like, oh, I'm in charge. It's just so strange to me. I don't like personally get. I'm a big self-deprecating individual. Like I always say, I'm 5 foot housewife. Like I start off right away with like I'm gonna be goofy, but also like know that we're the same.
Yeah.
Like it's an experience for both of us. There's nervousness on both ends because I want to make sure I do a good job, but also I want to make sure that this doesn't freak you the fuck out so that you come back or that you'll be willing to come back again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's another big element in this industry too is altered states, altered mental states. There is definitely a lot going on in our brain when we're getting pierced, when we're getting tattooed, when we're getting work done to our bodies. It does make people really vulnerable. It brings up the things in their own life that are, some of the background noise to why they're getting this done or what they're going to get out of it. And it unfortunately creates a perfect system for both clients and people within the industry to unfortunately fall prey to very unsafe or unsavory situations. And the capitalization and commodification of the industry creates its own host of mental health issues and burnout for piercers.
So, being that you did do traveling, how long were you traveling around for?
I was traveling for just under two
Just
years.
under 2 years. And so you saw shops and like their other practices, and uh, you do see shop owners who totally laid back, not a care in the world, like whatever happens, we'll take care of it, like yada yada. And then there's those that are like, how much did you sell that for? You realize that we're supposed to be okay. I mean, it's fine next time. but like the opportunity to make you feel shitty and like question everything. But yeah, that capitalization part is super weird when you look into the arts, which I do consider piercing and obviously tattooing, but piercing for sure being an art form. It's so weird when you start to throw money into it, like how it starts to change things and
The
make it
second
shift.
you throw money into it, it ruins everything. It does, and a lot of owners in the industry are very profit motivated, and honestly, sometimes those laid back owners are the worst because they're the
Oh,
folks who are coming from an industry before it was an industry, before there was any regulation, before there was anything, and so they're laid back to a fault where it's, oh, I don't need to make you an employee, even though I make you work like an employee. You can be a 1099, an independent contractor. It's, oh, I don't need to pay you as an apprentice. You're working in exchange for that. And they are very casual. These are the owners who have been paying everyone under the table and not paying taxes for
what? Never.
decades and just kind of living like it's still the Wild West in the industry. And I do think there's something to be said for studios that have structure and system in place if that structure is there for the benefit of the employees.
Right.
And in a lot of studios, it's there for the benefit of the boss's bottom
Mm.
line.
That's funny. I am super lucky in the shop that I have to where like every change that our boss wants to make is very much what's your guys' input? Like, how do you feel about this? How can we do this in a way that it benefits everybody? Um, because yeah, sometimes you have some stinkers that kind of can drag the shop down and like you have to reassess now. Be like, okay, well, how could one person deviate? We need to all be on the same page.
Yes, yeah, and it's so important to have a workspace that's community minded where everyone gets their input. Rachel LeBron here, shout out Rachel, puts out a really incredible like anti-capitalist piercing zine, and in
Ooh.
this one talked about like I think one of the opening lines is like forget like fuck the second location,
Mm.
fuck the huge inventory. Like instead of focusing on having all of this money to keep opening chains and chains of shops and doing stuff, like take care of your employees, take care of your community. And a lot of times what happens in piercings is bosses and owners don't. They're only worried about the money. And piercers are as a whole overworked, underpaid, and because people are so passionate about this industry, they do it out of love. And it is killing the modern piercer. And we are losing people from this industry, amazing people every single year because they can't do it anymore. Their mental health can't do it. And I don't fault them. And it's coming from greedy bosses who are just interested in making more money.
So I love the perspective that you have. I'm curious though. So prior to being in piercing, like, were you aware of your personal like mental state? Like, have you been diagnosed with anything? Like, are there medication? Like, have you run that gambit and then came into the industry, or was it partially like finding yourself? Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say?
Yes, yeah. So I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder when I was much younger, before I was in the industry. And honestly, piercings had always been an outlet for me to cope with a lot of mental health issues, with a lot of depression and body image issues. I remember getting my first nose piercing and looking in the mirror. It was like my first body piercing, and I was like 14 at the time and in high school, which is a terrible time in everyone's life. And really feeling like that was the first time I looked in the mirror and liked what I saw. And piercings for me were some of the first ways to actually celebrate my body and treat it with kindness. So I fell in love with the industry immediately. But I was very mentally unwell. I was not coping with anything super
Like
good.
body dysmorphia on
Oh
top of that stuff?
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
eating disorder, everything that comes with BPD, black and white thinking,
BPD is so
splitting.
brutal. Like for all of I sorry to cut you off, but like of all of the things that people have to deal with, I feel the most for people with BPD because there sure there's medication that helps, but so much of it is behavioral stuff that it's such a fucking struggle.
It's basically all behavioral. I was on a lot of medications that helped at the time, but didn't really do anything. And I'd say piercing and also body suspension like saved my life. Like getting into the industry
Interesting.
and getting to have these experiences is 100% what pulled me out of that really dark place. But it also meant that I was a very impressionable, mentally unwell 18-year-old getting into an industry where everyone said you have to work for free 7 days a week for some 40-year-old man. And if you're lucky, you can live with him so you don't
Named
have to pay
Russ.
rent and you can afford your things. And the industry really created a perfect opportunity for a lot of abuse and a lot of harmful situations for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked a little bit about that before we got up here, but the so for those of you that's first time listening, I come from a background of photography, concert photography, journalism, and like as I migrated from like industry to industry, I mean, photography, there's all sorts of niches and whatnot, but um, in those realms, like we just kept seeing shitty dudes and then more shitty dudes. And then by the time I got to comedy, it was like there's the culmination of all those things because comedians are so unstable as it is, right? And the reason why I'm saying this is because it's comparable to piercing in that we're the rejects, we're the freaks. And so when those people, certain people, not everybody, start to feel like they have a little bit of, I hate to call it power, but like clout, I guess you could say. It's real easy to start to look at the world differently and be like, "Oh, I'm the cool one now," and therefore start to change your attitude. And like going from all of those things and watching all of that shit happen was just so like I don't. It's hard for me to grasp how you being accepted equates to being able to take advantage of people.
Well, like I said earlier, like people who are mentally healthy and well adjusted typically don't become body piercers. And that's true of everyone in the industry. On both sides of it. So we have years of people who were probably struggling with depression and anxiety, BPD, bipolar, who felt really called to piercings and tattoos, who found salvation through piercings and tattoos and healing and catharsis, who enter this industry and get horrifically abused by their bosses and their mentors and their coworkers, oftentimes in situations where they're very underpaid, so limited access to healthcare and mental health services. And then they grow up to be the next generation of tattoo artists and piercers who are mentors and studio owners. And we have this whole industry has generational trauma of how
Oh
many
my god, yeah.
people have been abused or mistreated during their apprenticeship, and then they think it's right and they think it's fair. And this doesn't justify in any way anyone's behavior, but I look at some of the worst instances in this industry and some of the people who create and keep and maintain these systems of power in the industry that cause these mental health struggles. And deep down, they're all just still these really hurt teenagers and young 20 somethings who had really bad experiences getting in the industry. And now they're just repeating the cycle for someone new.
It is such a bummer when you hear the whole "you think that's bad" argument. Like, "You think that's bad, let me tell you about my trauma." It's like,
Yeah.
no, that's whataboutism, and what you're doing is acknowledging 2 bad things. Your bad thing doesn't negate this person's, for 1, threshold, 2, the fact that this bad thing is happening. Like, eh, it's so funny to me because 'cause I'm 36, so I'm like this in between, like, "Oh, everybody's a bunch of pussies," and, like, this acceptance movement, and when I was younger, you know, Iraq and all that shit, like we very much there was a lot of anti-war and like all of that stuff. And we wanted better for when our kids were growing up and a safer environment. And it's surprising to me that people don't realize a safer world, yeah, we're all gonna look like a bunch of pussies. But also we're safer. Like it's so funny. Like we want this good thing, but we want it on our terms. Like I want safety, but I also want to shoot off my M16 whenever I can. So hope that's okay.
We do, and we also don't wanna have to admit that what happened to us was bad or wrong or that we were victims ourselves,
Yeah.
And so we have, a whole generation of piercers who are just like, "Hey, I'm like a depressed 16-year or like a depressed 18-year-old, and I'd like a job and to be able to make money and pay bills." And it's, "No, you have to work for free. You're so lucky you get to work here for free and I don't abuse you because when I was an
Oh
apprentice,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I had to drink the rinse cups and get get my studio's name branded on me and get my boss's name tattooed on me because I was their property. You have it so easy because you just have to work unpaid.
We all have hepatitis C. It's a rite of passage.
Yeah, you have to do it. Hey, I have my second mentor made me get her initials tattooed on me because I was her property. She believed in that
No.
old school mentality.
I
This came from back in the day. They would take the shop key and set it on fire and then brand apprentices with it uh, as part of being an apprentice. And then it got turned into the modern tattooing apprentices with the name of the shop or their mentor. Unfortunately, there's less of that these days, but it's, to admit that they don't do it to their apprentices because it was wrong is to admit that what was done to them is wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a hard thing to do.
That is true. I meet a lot of people there's a lot of people that I've asked to be on the show, and a couple of them have been like, "Oh, I spent a long time burying my trauma. I want to keep it down there." And it's like, there's still a lot of people who don't understand the value of this sharing. It's not so that like woe is me type of shit. It's like this hopefully is to make people not feel alone, plus give them the strength to say, no, I can say something. And there are people who will support me in that moving forward.
And we need that desperately in this industry because this industry has an incredible way of isolating people. And a lot of studio owners and mentors are very great at making people feel like you can't talk to other piercers, you can't talk to other shops, no one else will take you. What you've got here is the best you're going to get. And that's how people end up in these situations for years and years and years until they burn out and leave the industry. And we have to talk about it and we have to normalize talking about it and bringing awareness to it. And that's how we start changing it.
And that isolation is so easy because the second you leave the shop, like for a lot of people, it's out of sight, out of mind. And
Yeah.
the shit that you just dumped on that person, they're now taking home with them. And because they went into an environment where they were like, this is my life now, I'm so fucking excited. They might not have the friends that they had before. And so they are straight up alone. And with that, I'm curious about like on the addiction side of things, what you've seen personally because you got to travel so much, or just, in meeting friends through conferences and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of piercers, like we're the weirdest person in our town. We don't really have anyone else to relate to and share some of these life experiences and these things. No, like again, nobody mentally well becomes a body piercer. Like addiction is a real problem in this industry too. And I think we struggle with a lot of the same stuff like the food industry does,
Mm,
long hours, like being super overworked, but also just being an industry born out of like partying and
mhm.
having a good time. And a lot of folks do end up turning to that. And it's very unfortunate. We lose more and more people every year in this industry to addiction. And I think it all stems from the fact that a lot of us do have these mental health issues and maybe don't know how to deal with them, or especially in this industry, we don't have health insurance. We're
Yeah.
not well paid. We are expected to work 6 to 7 days a week because we love it. And we end up in these situations where we just don't have access to mental health care, and our peers aren't really talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, I was just talking to Molly, my coworker that's here, guys. If you don't know her, you will soon. Um, but we were just talking about so my wife is a mental health professional, and like her job is the thing that she needs but doesn't have time for, and her job isn't necessarily accommodating in that sense. Like they want to be, so they'll use all the verbiage that like clears them for HR and all that shit, but also make sure that you do it after your shift. So put in your 50 to 60 hours, and then yeah, then you can deal with what happened to you when you were a child, and like how dealing with these patients is now triggering your PTSD. And like, actually, now that I think about that, so when it comes to clients, I'm super open because I have codependency issues. um and so it can really like, I'm not aware of it as it's happening, but start to bring me into that space of like, I'm being very understanding, but I forget why I'm understanding is because of all the bullshit that I've been through. And you do kind of start to go, oof. They leave and you're like, oh, that was heavy. It was nice for them, but I'm left with all this stuff.
Yes, it's and it happens often, and it's this weird balance of providing a safe space where your clients can have those experiences and get what they need out of getting this work done, but also know how to how to set healthy boundaries for yourself, and make sure that you are not just giving 100% of yourself to your client. And that's not anything that we're taught.
Right.
We learn how to be clean and we learn how to do piercings, and no one warns you about the fact that your clients are going to come in and they are going to trauma dump, or they're going to have things going on, and it is a part of this job, but you also have to learn how to set a healthy boundary within yourself for it, and not overwork yourself and overdo it. And to any clients listening, like, please, still come in, still share your stories, still make connections with us. It's on us as piercers and as studios to make sure that we can handle this well, right? And can I ramble about this for a little bit?
Yes, go.
It's
Wait, let me go off, Queen. Now you may
I,
go.
I have a lot of thoughts on this subject. No. But we, first of all, really need to start teaching piercers about, being trauma informed and being able to work with clients who are coming in for this, and not just, okay, I'm going to teach you how to do this VCH piercing the right way and do it straight, but also, hey, so you're going to see a lot of victims of sexual violence and
Oh, wow.
divorce survivors, even, genital mutilation survivors who are getting these piercings to heal. And how do you create the experience that they need out of this without giving up too much of yourself, and actually have conversations about how to do this the right way so we can provide the best service for our clients, but also create a structure that allows it too. Things like making sure your employees have lunch breaks and they can eat during their shift, doing appointment only piercings for things like that. So you have enough time to spend with clients who are going to be coming in and needing emotional support. And talking about, again, doing trauma informed work and understanding that clients are going to come to you for this, and how do I create a safe space for them? How do I follow up with them? And how do I leave it at the studio at the end of my day?
That's what I was going to ask about, was like, was there a moment when you kind of realized that you had a lack of boundaries, or that you needed to start implementing more?
Yes. So I got into this industry. I had three varyingly bad apprenticeships, with a lot of abuse, and I left my last one in 2019 in not really a great place. I landed at Icon Tattoo and Body Piercing in Nashville, which is an incredible, incredible studio. Wonderful people, wonderful staff. But I didn't know how to set a boundary. I started working there and I said, okay, I'll be your piercer. I'll also be your web designer and your manager
Oh,
and your social media manager and your outreach person and your jewelry orderer. And I'll answer the phones and I'll train the new employees. And is there anything else on the to-do list that I can do too? And I burnt myself out really, really quickly. And I realized I was, taking on all of my stuff, but also all of my client stuff, and I needed to take a step back. So in 2022, I actually took a 3-month hiatus from piercing,
oh,
and did some pretty extensive mental health treatment during that time.
some ayahuasca.
Some ketamine, actually.
I
I
have
was
heard that for PTSD.
Yeah, I was like, I need to be in a K-hole about this. No, it was actually one of the most amazing things I've ever done. It was incredible for my PTSD. And then I've been guesting and traveling and only working 1 week out of the month doing actual piercing to give myself time to learn how to be a person again. And it
Oh.
was only after 2 years of that I feel ready to be back full time.
Well, and I mean, on top of that, so at what point, sorry if you've talked about this a million times before, but with your gender identity, at what point did that come into play?
So I'd always kind of known about it. I was binding on and off in high school and cross dressing, but just wasn't in an environment where I felt like I could be myself. I was beginning to explore transition shortly before I started my apprenticeship in Florida, but my mentor there was not a good person, and I was rapidly discouraged from that. The studio that I worked at had rules about how we could wear our hair and what color it could be, clothing we could wear at work, and we had to get permission from our boss to get tattooed or pierced. So I grew out my signature half shave. I had boring brown hair for a while. I had not had natural hair since I was 13, and my whole appearance and life were very controlled, so I wasn't able to explore any of that. And it was actually working at Icon for Ian, and working with Rob and Gray, and having that kind of support system where I felt safe enough to explore my gender identity again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I mean, the already, I mean, without knowing, I'm assuming there's loads of fun traumatic experiences prior to all this bullshit.
Oh, yes.
But I mean, you know, do you mind if I ask how old you are?
I'm 29.
29. Okay. Okay. So you're kind of in that age of like where mental health was getting a little bit better in the schools. It
Yes.
wasn't in a perfect, I mean, it's still not in a perfect place, but
Yeah.
it it certainly wasn't as spoken about, and resources weren't as readily available as they are now.
No.
Like my son has like 4 options for different types of counselors that he can talk to, including staff having training and like all this shit. Um, but I mean, the gender thing is still a fucking nightmare. But yeah, so you're in that group where like, I'm glad you guys are having an easier time, but I did not have an easy
I
time.
did not, yeah. But, I think it would if I hadn't taken that apprenticeship in Florida, I think I would have been able to come out a lot sooner and do more with that a lot sooner. A lot of it really was, like, being at a studio where gender roles were literally strictly enforced as part of, like, studio policy and studio rules.
Yeah, when you already have body dysmorphia and I can't imagine like trying to conform to, like, you already have your own limitations and like hate everything that you wear and like questioning every fucking step of your day, and then to have somebody force this already strict or like chaotic regimen that you have, I can't imagine like.
It was not great. It was not great. Yeah, most of those of us who were there at that time now have struggled with like trauma surrounding how we dress and how we present ourselves at work because it was so like deeply ingrained in the rules there and how it was. And unfortunately, I hear like similar things at a lot of studios. Weirdly enough, I hear that it's very common to be told that you can't look too alternative if you want to work in a lot of shops.
That's so fucking funny. Like to go from high school dropouts, like ex-cons, like filling tattoo shops and piercing shops to now being like, we're a business.
Well, yeah, now there's money to be made, and the money to be made is on like gold sales and high end piercings. And there's nothing wrong with wanting a business to look professional. Don't come into work
Sure.
in like your pajamas and
Wait,
some
what?
flip flops.
Oh, fuck.
But there is a lot of studios who are saying like, well, we want to cater to this broad clientele. We don't want to look super alternative. And while it works for some studios, a lot of places do take it too far, and just basically end up controlling how their staff looks or dresses or acts entirely.
I mean, not to keep, singing the praises of our shop, but like we're in a small town where there's like Trump signs every fucking holiday. There's 1,000 pickup trucks at the high school with flags on the back, and like can seem very like, pigeonholey. I don't know if that's what I'm looking for exactly, but we're a shop that doesn't give a fuck. Like I wear a God is gay shirt to work like once or twice a week, and people are just psyched to see us.
Yeah, that's the thing. Those are the places where it's extra important to have that representation. Like, yeah, you can be like a super cool alternative piercer wearing that shirt on like Height Street in San Francisco, but it's Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where that has a really big impact. And that's going to go that extra mile for your clients and people in your town to know that there are these safe spaces and that there are people who are like them, who look like them, who feel the way they feel, showing them that they're not alone.
Or even, I mean, there's people who come in who have no tattoos, no nothing, and but still feel different. And being able to be surrounded by people who it's on our sleeves, literally.
Yeah.
Um, I think that creates like their guards are already down. So we have like visual icebreakers, because there's the stereotypical questions of like, what does this tattoo mean? How long did this take? And those things. Oh, also, I love the heavily tattooed piercers. Do you tattoo too? Always get that question. But yeah, it just is that like visual icebreaker for them to be like, okay, I don't have to put on appearances for these people, which take that as you will, like whether that means like we look like shit, therefore I didn't clean my house, so they can whatever. Yeah, I mean, back to that whole, client and piercer dynamic, setting up boundaries. It's interesting that like a lot of yours still goes back to the way that the shop is operated.
Yes.
So that seemed to like clip your wings as to how effective of a piercer you can be for clients.
100%. And I think a lot of times it's really easy to like put that responsibility on the client. And in some situations, it is like boundaries to get crossed. Clients do cross boundaries sometimes. We have to be able to enforce that. There is a point where it goes from trauma dumping to just literally triggering
Yeah,
where we need to be able to be like, whoa, pump the brakes. But it is a part of our job to be present for clients who are having these experiences and who are exploring these parts of their bodies and these parts of themselves through the work that we're doing. And we can do that the best when we are provided a situation to do that well in. And, if you're the type of piercer who doesn't want to do a lot of that, there are studios for that where they just do, limited piercings. They don't do a lot of more intimate piercings. They just do simple stuff. Um,
Claire's right.
but for a lot of us, like what brought us to piercing is how piercing made us feel about ourselves, is the way it allowed us to connect with our bodies, is that just weird feeling of lightness and feeling better after you get pierced. You have this really difficult day, you're having a bad week, and you're like, "Ugh, I just need a new tattoo. I just need a new piercings." Sometimes you just need to feel bad to feel better. And we get to provide that for people, and we can acknowledge that clients are going to come in and have this trauma they need to talk about. We can acknowledge that we can provide something that oftentimes even therapists and other mental health professionals cannot provide, and we can find ways to do it for our clients that still honor ourselves. And a lot of that comes down to studio structure, how well a piercer is paid, if you're not worried about your own bills, if you have
Mhm.
your own mental health access where you can go and see someone and say, wow, I had this client this week that was really heavy that's been sitting with me. I need to talk about it, So we can structure our studios to take care of our employees so that our employees can take care of our clients so that we can all take care of our community.
Extremely well put. Are you a politician? When it comes to like kind of this, because at what point did you start to feel empowered in a sense? Because I don't want to say that you're a leader, but like on the way here, it was kind of hard to get you here. So, I mean, do you recall like when that kind of shift in like realizing that there were so many eyes on you? Um,
So I would say that's actually like a shift that's currently ongoing. It still doesn't feel real. Imposter syndrome is a bitch. We all deal with it. I deal with it too. But I started blogging and writing about piercing. Listen, piercing is my whole life. I'm sitting on here talking about healthy boundaries on vacation at a piercing convention, taking a break from piercing classes to do an interview about body piercing. I don't have those healthy boundaries with this industry. But I started writing about piercing mostly for clients to make accessible information. And I realized really quickly that there were a lot of piercers who needed that information too. And I was just really excited to info dump. So for whatever reason, people liked it and decided to read it. So 7 years of info dumping later, and I started to realize I've accidentally found a platform. And through kind of just trauma dumping online and being like, wow, I was in some really shitty apprenticeships and really shitty situations. And hopefully, if I talk about it, other people can avoid it. And also, all I want to do is talk about it. I don't have the I never want to talk about my trauma and bury it down deep trauma. I have the I can't shut up about my trauma. Um, and I was honestly resistant to it at first because I was like, I'm not that cool.
yeah.
Don't treat me like this. Like save that for like the Luises and the Brian Skellys and the other people. And it was honestly conference last year and this year and the people that I have encountered guesting and traveling who helped me find the confidence to realize that I do have a voice and I have something to say and I do have the ability to make an impact. And the best thing I can do with that is just try and give back to this community I love and try and create spaces that are, better than I found them.
I've found that, like, my wife and I say this all the time, which is like we're lucky to have gone through the shit that we went through, which may seem weird, but for somebody like me, like the industries that I've been a part of most of the time, like cool for whatever that means. Underpaid is what it was for 10
Yes.
years.
Yeah.
But it allowed me to have a key to be able to have these conversations. So rather than seeing it as like, oh, everyone's fucking looking at me and I'm sick as fuck, it's more like, oh, I'm glad. So while I have you,
Yeah.
like people joking about being alcoholics and shit like that, like it gives me this moment to be like, well, actually, you know that it's your midbrain and then your limbic system and then your prefrontal cortex. And they do this little dance and it gets all fucked up. So, like, I get to have these conversations that a lot of people don't have. It's not that they don't have access to, but like to go into the addiction world a little bit, like the rehab centers have like a 95% fail rate, meaning 95% of people who go to rehab or treatment relapse, which is insane. Like you imagine like if a client came in and you're like, hey, just so you know, there's a 5% chance this is going to work. So if you're still game, let's do it.
So snake eyes.
um,
It's not even a 5% chance, folks. Don't do it.
that whole community side of the world, um, there's just this huge gap, and there's like a couple of things that like led to me finding sobriety the way that I did, which is first up, addict. Second, being an atheist, so like being kind of curmudgeon about all of these places being faith based or full on religiously based. But then that it's like, okay, if I can either be pissy about this and get nothing out of this stay, or let's just try to find as much objective truth as possible. And through that, I have gone without relapse, and which is super lucky because, like I said, 5%, not great. But because there's that lack of information, now that I'm in a position where people do want to open up and they start to talk about that stuff, I can be like, okay, so I don't know if you know this or if you've tried treatment or anything like that, but a lot of the reason why this stuff is failing is because they're not talking to you about genetically why you're predisposed. It's not just because your parents, what they're saying is generational trauma. So there's mental health stuff almost always, like 99% of the time, mental health is associated with addiction. And I feel like that ties into so many industries that like it's applicable to everybody. Everybody can become an addict. And see, because now I'm rambling. Um, but to wrap that up, the fact that I've been through all that shit, and then am in a cool job, people are more prone to wanting to share that stuff. So rather than feeling like, oh, I'm a cool person, it's like I have a hall pass to be able to, or a backstage pass to be able to connect with way more people about shit that's really important.
Yeah, that is first of all an incredible journey, but also like very similar to how I feel with this. And um, I would say like piercing probably has maybe a 10% success rate of folks getting out of bad apprenticeships and not just falling
Oh,
into the same thing and the same behaviors. And I'm guilty of that too. I left those systems of abuse and I was angry. I was so angry for a very long time, and I started taking that anger out in unhealthy ways online in forums and being, unnecessarily like brutally honest, but almost more about the brutality than the honesty.
yeah.
Um,
It's real easy
and
to do.
real easy to do. And in this industry, you were not here for the days of the body modification learning forum, but we used to have an educational forum on Facebook that was vicious, where people would post for critique or for feedback.
Oh, no.
And it was basically how hard can I rip into this person about what they're doing and what they're doing wrong and why they should just hang up their needles and quit. And I think a lot of it was people's anger and hurt over their experiences in the industry, and those like repressed feelings coming out in these community spaces. And I started falling into that trap myself. I was very angry about what had happened to me in my apprenticeships. I wanted there to be change in the industry, and I felt like there wasn't an outlet to see that change being made. There wasn't like, the APP is a health and safety organization and they do a fantastic job at that, but they are not the piercing police.
Right.
And I wanted other people to not go through what I went through, and I just had so much emotion and anger pent up that it started coming out in other places. And I realized that was happening, and that was part of my realization that I needed to step back and get mental health treatment, and take my hiatus and kind of pump the brakes a little bit and work on healing my own trauma so that I could come back to the industry and say, okay, I still have a lot of anger and a lot of emotion about what happened to me, but now I want to channel it towards trying to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. And it was very easy for a while to say, well, I just want someone else to fix this and change this. And I realized there's no one here who's going to come and do it. Like, it's on us to do this work. And that's when I started writing more about mental health online, being more vulnerable about the ways this industry has given me CPTSD, has caused me to struggle with suicidality and burnout, but also start guesting and traveling and trying to meet with more piercers in person, and talk to more piercers and say, hey, like, it doesn't have to be like this. You don't have to stay in these situations. Like, we can do something better.
Yeah. It reminds me of like any social justice movement, there have always been people who the complaint is, do you have to be so loud about it? And without realizing that, like, unless we have, thank God for those loud people, because they don't make up the entire community. But if we didn't have them, then it wouldn't, like, they're basically like parting the crowd so that the people who are too scared to do that shit can walk behind them and then hopefully end up at a safe place.
Oh, 100%. Like, when I recall getting into this industry and there was a letter from Alan Faulkner that was super popular online about apprenticeships. That was basically like, we have too many piercers. The industry is oversaturated. If you're trying to get into this industry, you better be ready to work your ass off, work unpaid, like, work 7 days a week. If you want it, you're going to work this hard. And people wore it as a badge of honor. People went online and were like, I moved across the country with just what I could fit in my car and slept in my mentor's backyard for 6 months,
What
working
the
7 days a week. And people would brag about it and they were proud about it. And I did the same thing. People would go online and be like, oh, I really want to be a piercer, blah, blah. And I'd be like, well, you got to really want it. Like, I work at the shop 7 days a week. I work night shift 3 days a week. I sleep for 2 or 3 hours at a time, usually on the couch in the lobby between my shifts. And I was proud because it was, look at how bad I want it if I'm willing to do this.
Yeah.
And that was how it was spoken about. And by the time I finished and left those situations and realized how bad they were, were kind of starting to have that conversation, but not really yet. And I think a lot of people were afraid to speak up and say, it was a very unpopular opinion at the time to say you should pay your apprentice. You would get ripped apart in that learning forum for implying that an apprentice deserves to be paid. And I realized that it's just going to take us speaking out and starting to be loud about it, to try and make this change happen. And if there is one thing I have, it's a big fucking mouth. Gotta put it to use.
It reminds me of, like, when I would see people trying to speak up, myself included. I got in trouble a couple of times because one of the issues with codependency is that white knight syndrome. So, like, nobody's doing anything, so I have to be the one. I'm the only one that could do it. But like, the criticisms are always like, for somebody who's trying to be loud and, like, protective. Oh, you're not even good at what you do anyways. You're just doing this so that people start to notice you. And it's like, it's so easy to undermine somebody who they have the best of intentions. And then the second that you start to critique their work or even question their work, like, now that person's going to give up too. Does that make sense? Like,
yes. And this industry struggled with that as well for a long time. Back through to its founding, we have treated especially women and queer folks who have wanted to speak out about flaws and issues in the industry poorly, often by attacking their work, and attacking who they are and how they do things. and it makes it very hard to speak up. But I feel like the piercing industry had kind of like a Me Too movement probably about like 3, 4 years ago now, and a lot of folks have started speaking up and telling their stories. And unfortunately for us, we're seeing it cause real change, and we're seeing enough people speaking out to now, I would say probably at least half of the best studios like pay their employees, pay their apprentices, have health insurance. COVID means that most of us got lunch breaks. It's slow change, but it's change, and it's happening because enough of us decided to be loud at once to where they couldn't drown us out anymore.
So, I always like to ask if guest has advice for people. Um, so, being somebody who is not, you don't own a studio, correct?
No, no, no.
So, being somebody who's not a studio owner, like how how do you advocate for yourself when you're coming into somebody else's business, which is already like a cool kids club? It's like tough enough to get into. Like, what advice do you have for those peeps?
Know your worth and set that boundary early, because we all do love what we do, and we do really love piercing, and that means it's really easy for us to burn ourselves out on it. And so it is important right from the get-go to know that you are worth having days off, you're worth being paid a living wage, you're worth a lunch break, and you're worth taking a break at work when you need it, and put your foot down and say, I am not going to work somewhere that is not going to give me these things. And I think for a lot of us, we accept less because we think that's all we're worth or all we're capable of or all that's out there. And I'm here to tell you that it's not. And we can make their pockets hurt if enough of us won't work for studios that are treating people this way, and we force them to incite that change. But also just to really have those boundaries within yourself to be able to say, I'm not going to come in on my day off. I'm not going to answer these messages at 3 a.m. when I'm in bed about to go to sleep. Like, I'm worth being a person and having my own life too. I'm not just a piercer.
And as far as the struggle with finding a job that you love, and then that process of like, how do I word this? Finding a job that you love, and then seeing that it affects your mental health, and trying to find the good in it without, you know, running away from it, because it's not fair to yourself to, you know, I don't know. Does that make sense where I'm trying to go?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
And I think the answer to that, especially in the piercing industry, is community. Is getting out there and shadowing or guesting at other studios and talking with other piercers, leaning on those of us in the industry who've kind of already been through that, who have very good advice to offer about how to avoid that, and making sure that you have a support system within this industry, and importantly, in a support system outside of your own shop that's not affected by shop
Mm.
politics and shop drama and things like that, where you can lean on those people for advice when you need it to help you learn to put up those boundaries and learn to keep yourself healthy while you're doing something that you love so you don't give all of yourself to it.
Yeah. Well, plug all of the things. Is that a pun in our industry?
Yes, in more than our industry. We're in Vegas. I am pretty easy to find online. My name is Lynn Loheide, and I'm lynnloheide.com. I'm Lynn Loheide on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. I kind of made it easy and convenient across all the social media, where you can find me doing a lot of body piercing education, but also a lot of talking about mental health in the industry and the experiences for clients with body piercings and body modification and mental health as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. And to the listeners, be well to yourselves.